You know in your gut when things are not going right, even if you don't have the words. It's even harder when you tell someone, but then you're told that everything's fine, but you still know something is up. This is the case for today's guest. She knew that her son needed more help in his sound development, but was constantly told everything's fine. She started seeking help when her son was 18 months old, asking doctors, friends, family members, and more. And finally, when her son was 4 years old, the preschool teacher called out the same concerns that Mom knew all along. Finally, some validation and the relief that comes from being validated. Now she's empowered and having direction to go for help. If this is you, you know this is so frustrating. So hang on for today's story. And if this is you, then you need a person who knows how to ask the questions, who knows how to probe to find out what is actually happening with your child. Talk to me, communicate with me, because I can help with this. And whether or not we are a fit to work together, you will leave the conversation with a clearer understanding of what is going on and how to talk about it, and what a next step is for you. This is one way I help parents. In the show notes is a booking link for a conversation. You will be empowered by listening to today's guest. I'm glad you're here. Does your child have a speech-language delay and you really want them to talk? Do difficult behaviors derail home life and you know the frustration is a communication struggle? Does your child see a speech therapist and you wonder, what do they do and how can I help? If these or similar questions are in your mind, this podcast is for you. Hello, my name is Dina Lynn Rosenbusch. I am a speech-language pathologist that has worked with children from birth to 21 for 3 decades. And in my classrooms, I see you wanting to connect with the heart of your child, but their speech and language skills create a barrier. So if you have a kiddo that has difficult behaviors, needs to expand their language or learn to say speech sounds, and maybe even receives speech therapy, stay tuned, because in this podcast, you will learn how to use your daily life as a tool to communication practice and how to do that practice. You will become confident knowing you are making the difference you want to make. And you will hear success stories of parents who have navigated these struggles already. We'll do this all while focusing on building deep, meaningful connection and confidence in your kiddo. So grab a cup of coffee along with a notebook and pen. It's time to speak in the way your child's brain understands. And that is the language of play. Welcome back. Today is sort of a long episode, but you are going to totally enjoy it. First, we talk a little bit about what this guest's actual job is, and then we dig into what happened as she was raising her child. Both parts are going to nourish your soul. As you may remember, May is Better Speech, Language, and Hearing Month. And for this month, we're highlighting people who have worked with or experienced speech pathology in its various forms. In this May series, first we talked with Marsh Naidu about her child with cerebral palsy. Then we talked with Rachel Whitaker about raising boys. And then we talked with Jason Heffler about stuttering and fluency. And today we continue the series with Suzanne Culberg. And now we shall begin. Today we have Suzanne Culberg, the Nope Coach, with us. She is on a mission to help women say no without guilt or shame or second guessing. Suzanne will show you how to stop people-pleasing and get things done on your terms and finally feel good about your choices. Now that, Susan, is what you do, and I love that. That was a learning curve for me when I first realized, oh, I'm a people pleaser? What does that actually mean? Because it sounded good at first. So welcome to the Language of Play, where we're actually going to talk more about kids too. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. My name's Suzanne Culberg. I'm the Nope Coach, joining you from Sydney, Australia. So for many of your listeners, I imagine it's the future. The future's looking good, everyone, because we tend to be a day ahead. And I work primarily with women, help and people pleasers, martyrs, can't say noers, helping them to put themselves first without feeling selfish. Because we've all heard fit your own oxygen mask, and we do the nascent eye roll when the airline person goes through the speech. But really, if you don't look after yourself, like if you're on a plane and you are looking out for your kids, which we want to, we're parents, but then we pass out in the aisle, not only can we not help our kids, we can't help ourselves, and then we're becoming a burden for someone else, and then we're leaving the responsibility for our children to someone else because we're passed out in the aisle. And I think we forget that because we're forever looking after, making everyone else a priority
Mhm.
except ourselves. Or it's like, oh, I'll do this, but we're at the end of a never-ending to-do list. So the stuff for us never gets done. And I think it's time that we, not only do we do that for ourselves, but also for modeling for our children that self first isn't selfish.
Yes. And that is tricky though. To get that straight
100%.
in our head, what is self first and not selfish? And so for the moms, particularly the moms, I think it's true for dads and moms, but more so for moms. Can you define even clearer what selfish versus self first is?
Thinking of a particular example. So I know your audience tends to have younger children, but
Yes.
my kids are they've got homework now. They're at the school, they're at the age where they have homework. One's just started high school, one's in primary school. And I thought that I was being helpful by helping my kids with their homework. And eventually it got to the point that my daughter came to me at 10 p.m. So she should have been in bed. I was just about to get into bed. And she's like, I've got this diorama due for school. And I was like, when is it due? She's like, tomorrow. And just starts crying. And in the past, I would have either done it myself or stayed up or whatever. But I was like, well, I guess you're going to fail that, aren't you? And in the moment, I felt like the world's worst mum because we think, oh, it's selfish to send my kid to school knowing they're going to fail. It's selfish when I could help them. But self first, I need to prioritize sleep. I have another child who's higher needs. I have my own work and my own things to do. Me staying up is not actually helping her because what is she learning? That mum will bail her out all the time? Eventually, she's
Mhm.
going to be grown and she's not going to have me. So to actually say to her, no, I'm not going to help with this, and instilling boundaries about, I'm happy to help with homework between this time, and I need this much notice. And ever since then, yes, she called me the worst mum in the world. Yes, she went to school upset. Yes, I felt terrible. But the
Mhm.
second she gets a project, she gets home from school, she's showing it to me with the due date, and we are planning a plan of attack for it. And she's never failed since. And then my son,
So wait a
last
second.
year,
Let me highlight that. So that fail may have been a grade in school, but she didn't actually fail. She learned a tremendous, wonderful lesson on how to take responsibility for herself and her own things. That
and I
was
think that's
beautiful
the distinction
parenting.
between selfish and self first, because
Okay.
I've got a similar example with my son. We have one vehicle between my husband and I, and he'd taken it into the office. So I was walking to school. He had his scooter. We get there, we're at the gate. I was like, dude, where's your bag? Like he didn't have his school bag.
Hmm.
And he's like, I left it at home. And I hadn't checked, so there was that. And I was like, I'm going home to work. Like I have client calls. I can't walk home, get your bag, walk back in. So you're going to have to ask other people, can I borrow pencils, things? He's like having a meltdown at the gate. I'm like, it'll be okay. I didn't make the child starve. For anyone listening, don't panic. They have the app. I love modern day parenting. I jumped on the app. I ordered him a school lunch. So he had food. But other than that, he had to make do without the things for the day, which was dreadfully inconvenient for him. But once again, he has never forgotten his bag since. He's always like, where's my bag? And I think sometimes in our effort to help our children, our
Hmm.
partner, our parents, our neighbors, everybody, like the people pleaser in us,
Yeah.
we don't want to inconvenience anyone else. But oh, how much do we inconvenience ourselves?
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like being self first is like your inability to be organized is not my problem. And starting that from a young age where it doesn't matter, so that when things happen, like they're going for job interviews or they're applying for a house or they're doing the things that are really important and there is skin in the game, they're prepared.
Yeah. That makes sense. It almost sounds like when we think about the self first, like I guess I kind of think about it in a different terminology, maybe different words, which is the don't rescue. And the reason I think don't rescue is for the reasons that you're saying. When we rescue people, then they don't learn to take care of themselves and take responsibility for their lives because we always rescue, which we can put in the terminology of being inconvenienced, or we can put it in the terminology of I'm giving them life skills. One feels empowering and one feels guilty and shameful. And so it's interesting how much the way I define it is in my mind what you're saying. I just have these different definitions that I've changed over the years. And how we define it seems to be the way we experience it.
It's such a great example. And I've got one last one, and this one's very interesting. It only just happened yesterday. So my son came home from school and he wrecked somebody's toy thing. It was basically slime. I don't let my kids have slime because I can't deal with the mess. But apparently you add the activator and you add the glue and you turn it into slime. I don't understand why this was at school. And from my point of view as a parent, I was like, if you let your kid take something to school and it gets wrecked, that's on you. That's me. I might be a bit hard-nosed. But anyway, my son said to the child, I don't know how to use this. My mum's never let me have slime. And they're like, no, go ahead. And when he ruined it because he added too much activator or too much glue, I don't even understand. The kid totally lost it and said, unless you replace that, you can't be my friend anymore. And that's where I had the conundrum, because I was like, I don't want to teach my son that you earn friends by giving them things. But I also am on the mind of, if you destroyed something of somebody's, you should replace it. So we had a really big discussion. Like, we sat down yesterday and I was like, what do you want to do? Because for me, if I send my kid to school with something, I trust that likely it's gone. That's just the way it is,
Well, and it also sounded like your son did say to the other child, I don't know how to use this.
Yes. So we had this big discussion and I said, look, because he felt very guilty about it. I said, we will replace it because you have wrecked something and you feel guilt for this. I said, however, this is why we're doing it, not because you're going to earn friends. I said, because as soon as someone, to me, it starts a precedent of, well, unless you do this, you won't be my friend, unless you won't, like navigating friendships in school-age children, something I'm not, my kids are in grade like 4 and 7, and I'm still not fully prepared for this. But anyway, we ended up replacing it on that caveat. And I said, and in future, if someone says to you something and you really don't feel comfortable, and we had talk about peer pressure and all this sort of stuff, so yeah, that was a big lesson too. But where do you draw the line with things? And we're always learning. I think kids are our biggest teachers.
Yeah, I think so too, because it seems like our children just shine a spotlight right on our areas that have not matured yet. And we realize that, oh, I guess that part of me is still acting like a little kid. And we can either get mad about it and tell a kid, don't shine the light there, or we can choose to grow up. And I think natural instinct is to get mad at the kid for shining the light on it.
That's such a great example though, because it's like, yeah, sometimes I don't want to deal with this. Like, my son's really afraid of snakes. And so he's doing some therapy with that. And then they're like, why don't you come with him and do your fear of spiders? And I'm like, how about I just not? No,
I love it. I can appreciate that completely. It's always easier to see somebody else's need to grow, and it's harder to see our own. And it's encouraging to watch somebody else grow, but fearful to make ourselves grow.
100%.
Yeah. It is different when it's somebody else, and we all would love to be that person that's just strong and stepping into ourselves, but it's a bit of work, isn't it?
I get to choose. Like, is this a priority for me right now? Right now, no. Maybe eventually. But, when is it, like for him, for snakes, if it's becoming that he doesn't want to leave the house, that's something we need to address. Right. My fear of spiders doesn't have me staying in the house. But if there is one, apparently I have a spider scream. So everybody in the house knows Mummy's seen a spider.
That's funny. And we all have our things, don't we?
100%.
Yeah. I know that I've torn down a lot of things, and spiders was one for a time. It isn't anymore. Snakes was one for a time. It isn't anymore. I'll tell you, when the snake one came away from me was when my children were young. We came home from a vacation and we had one of those collapsible swimming pools, and I had dumped all the water out before we left on our vacation. And then when we drove back in from our vacation, I pulled back the swimming pool and there was a great big bull snake under it. And now they can be aggressive, but they're not dangerous per se. And I didn't know what kind of snake it was, but it had a tail that was whirring. And so my first thought was, how come you're acting like a rattlesnake, but you don't look like one? And I didn't know what to do. And so it was the first time I felt the biggest mommy bear in me. Like I caught that snake, I threw it in a cornfield, and it was like after the fact, I was shaken.
That's so impressive. I'd be like, that's what I call the snake catcher. But anyway.
Oh. Yeah, just, every so often you move into action and you look back and say, how did I do that? It was one of those moments. So, but anyway, my point is that we can lean back to that. Like many times when I'm fearful now about who knows what, I think, but I caught that snake.
100%. That's such a good thing. Reminding yourself of when you've faced hard things and nailed them. It's
Mhm.
like, is this that big of a deal compared to catching and rehousing a snake? Not really.
Love it. Now you have a child that has some challenges, and that was one of the things that actually got us communicating because you've got a kiddo that had significant speech delays. And so I would like to have a conversation about your journey in that because
100%.
because that's actually what got us together for this podcast because you have been a successful parent helping your kiddo get from not being able to communicate well to communicating. So let's get into that story.
So I have two children. They are 2 years apart, almost exactly in age. And my older child, my daughter, is very gifted. And so when my son, from my point of view, was experiencing delays, very early on, a lot of the people that I took him to or communicated to were like, Xanth's just gifted. He's normal. He's regular. And it was very frustrating to try and get some support in the beginning because I felt like nobody was taking me seriously. We ended up moving interstate when my son was 4, so my daughter was 6. And I enrolled him in daycare. So my son went to daycare, my daughter went to school, and he'd been there about 2 weeks. And the daycare called me and they're like, oh, we want to speak to you about Casimir. And I was like, oh, okay. And you know how you can tell someone is uncomfortable about what they're about to say to you?
Yeah.
And I can't remember how they worded it. And they're like, we've noticed that he's having some delays, or we've noticed, I can't remember how they said it. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. And the woman's like, this is the first time I've ever instigated one of these conversations. And the parent was
Thrilled.
relieved and, you know,
You're
and
validated.
yes. And anyway, they were that daycare. I'm thankful to them for this day because they were amazing. They helped me get a referral to a pediatrician. And when I had that, like through my general practitioner, and then that pediatrician actually went to visit him in daycare, unbeknownst to him, to witness the interactions and what was happening and all this sort of stuff. He actually spotted her there. So my son, yeah, he's now been diagnosed on the spectrum, but it's a spectrum. And in some ways he's a very advanced, in some ways not so much. So when he was caught being spied on, he was very unimpressed. But and then we went, yeah, so the whole process of things, it's, I think for anyone listening, it's not a one and done. It's a marathon or an ultra marathon. And there can be many steps involved and many people that you see and differing opinions from the people that you see. Because you also, too, some of these people you take them to, they see your child for 5 minutes. You see them 24/7. So for anyone who's like unsure or thinks there's something and their thoughts have been downplayed or dismissed, like really continue to advocate because that has made so much of a difference. And now all the support things we have in place, because once he started school, that's when the things that I had been mindful of, which was the year, because he was 4 when this happened, when he was 5, all came to a head because then they're in a structured environment and it's not just the play and interaction and things. So I think if I hadn't done that, we would have had a very different experience for where he is now.
Sure. I love that you bring up that you're as a mom, you knew something was different. How early did you know that something was different?
Probably 18 months to 2.
Yeah.
Because he's not speaking.
And I often hear parents even say 14 to 16 months, even on the early side. By 18 months, it's like a mom. She's got those mommy instincts and she has her radar on all the time because we're moms. I'm glad that you can go back to that point. How long between the time that you started thinking, something's going on, and you actually got the daycare woman who said something's going on to validate
That was
it.
over 2 years. We were at the time, I took to our local doctor and our local thing who knew us as a family.
Yeah.
And as I said, my daughter's gifted, and they're like, there's nothing wrong.
Yeah.
He's just, traveling in a different trajectory. And I was like, I understand that. I understand my daughter's gifted, but he's not meeting the milestones that the books say or that would be expecting or that other children of his age are. And that was just dismissed repeatedly. And then I got to a point where I was just, I can't do this anymore. So I didn't follow through.
Yeah, that's something that I see as a parent coach in this specific area so often. And when parents come to me and their child is 18 months oldish, and they're saying, I don't know what to do, but I just want to help them. I love that. Mommy's instincts are right. And even if your son didn't end up having autism, even if he was still on track, just think if you had the wherewithal to be able to say, oh, I know what to do to move him forward. And I can do some of that at home because I have a coach to help me do that right now, right here.
And I think
Yeah.
there's the little things that I imagine you would do as a coach. So, like, because he, as I said, he ended up being diagnosed on the spectrum, but he was different, whether or not
Mhm.
that happens. Things that he didn't do, he never played with Play-Doh. Like, he was always funny about textures. And
Mhm.
I just didn't push it because if a kid doesn't like something. But what I didn't realize until he came of school age is things like Play-Doh or things that they're doing with the fine motor with the fingers builds up the strength in their hand to be
Mhm.
able to hold a pencil. So
Yeah.
when the time came for him to start school, he couldn't hold a pencil. Like, we had to go through a lot of position as a grips, and anyway, it was a whole process. But it's like he hasn't built these fine motors, and just games that the people helped us with, like, he's this little dinosaur that you push the belly and it spits a ball out of its mouth. And like, he didn't like Play-Doh. Like, there was so many alternatives, and the reason we're wanting to do that is to build up these muscles. And it just didn't occur to me. So little things that you could do even from a young age to help build these muscles or build this coordination, so down the line the next steps are easier for them.
Yeah. That is so well said. And that is so true. I know when we play Mother Goose rhymes and we do finger plays and we're reading Dr. Seuss, all of that is precursors to being able to read because you're starting to get your sound system and your auditory system working so that when you are reading, eventually they connect. That's the building blocks that goes below that. Just like you're saying, Play-Doh helps you to hold a pencil. There's building blocks that don't seem like they're linked, but they are. Yeah.
Yes.
At what age were you feeling empowered to be able to do things at home with your kiddo?
So I must admit, so from when I first noticed, 18 months through to 4, I just kind of, I tried for probably a good year to get some support and was kind of downplayed and dismissed. But I was also mindful that I never wanted to force him to do things that he didn't want to do. But it wasn't until I had like assistance of different suggestions, because there's only so much Google can do, and never ever, like, if I give one piece of advice to mums, don't go to a mums group. One, like, online, people might have the best of intentions, but there can be battlegrounds drawn about the littlest thing, and then you're like, I'm just honestly asking for help, and then next thing you're being made to feel like you're persona non grata because of whatever it is. But yeah,
You
it wasn't really. Sorry, go ahead.
was just going to agree with you from the perspective of sort of, isn't that crazy? Agree, sort of, because some mom groups are really, really good, but the majority of what you find online seems to be like 50,000 different methods, and everybody knows the right way, and their way is the right way. So no matter what you do, you're wrong. And I just feel for parents that are looking online for that kind of support because in that environment, definitely people are removed from who you are. They're removed from seeing the environment. It's a little different than if you go to a mom's group in human form.
Yeah, and I think also too, I don't know if anyone, have you watched Modern Family?
I've seen it once.
So I only saw it recently. I watched it with my daughter of all things. And anyway, there's Cam and Mitch, they adopt a baby, and they, like, she's not doing the things that other babies are doing. Like, but we all go through, and they go to one of these in-person groups, and there's another kid there, and they're like, oh, so she's stacking yet? And they have their baby like stacking these blocks. And they're like, of course she's stacking. And then they stack it together. And then it's funny, the lady comes over and it's like, oh, Lily stacked. And they're all clapping. And she's like, oh, so do you want the video footage of her doing it? And he's like, pardon? And she's like, oh, we video all of our play groups. And you could just see him like panic. But I think, sometimes we inadvertently, unmeaning, go and compare our kid. And everyone's child is different. As you said, they're at different stages. They have different interests, even from a young age. They have different needs. Like maybe your kid isn't doing this thing because, as you said, they're hot, they're cold, they're thirsty, they're hungry, they're tired, they're not interested. So like finding the things that your child is interested in. And as I said, I've got 2 kids now, wildly different interests. It's fascinating. But knowing to follow their lead in a way, rather than being like, because I remember one time in pure frustration, I was saying something to my husband about the baby book, and he's like, well, you do realize Casimir hasn't read the baby book.
Of course she didn't. She couldn't follow the rules.
So it's just kind of like, I think, sometimes it's that people may be well-meaning, but inadvertently end up into this comparison thing, or telling you where they should be for this age.
Let's make a link between what we were actually talking about at the beginning of this episode and now, because what I'm hearing is that we parents sometimes feel validated by the behavior of our kids rather than allowing our kids to be who they are, and not taking our validation from that, but rather being okay with them being lesser in this skill area and more in this skill area, not patting ourselves on the back when they're super skilled, in the same way as we don't feel badly if they're underskilled.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point to make, because they're going to reach the milestones or interests or things in their own time. And I think helping them to navigate and support and grow in their own way, rather than, and I think when you have kids who are vastly different, you can kind of compare. You don't mean to, but you do.
Right.
But yeah, like learning to read or learning to tie a shoe or do something with my daughter, they weren't things that even, I don't even remember helping her with any of those things. She just kind of did it. And with my son, it's been like a whole process, and we've all celebrated the each step of the way.
And that's great. Wait, now, how old is he now?
9.
9. And so he got done with speech therapy, I think last year. Is that what you had told me?
8. Mm-hmm.
At 8. Okay. Is he speaking speech sounds accurate for his age? Nothing lingering?
Now, yes. The only lingering is the TH and the F.
Okay.
So they said sometimes that can be about 9 to 10, but so that's the only sound. But before, lots of things. Like he couldn't say, you couldn't hear the difference between glass and grass, like the L and the R sound. When we first started, basically our little family was the only ones who could really understand him. Everybody else was just, and then he would get frustrated because I think he could comprehend that what was coming out wasn't what he was trying to. And especially spending time with his grandparents, he just couldn't stand going to see his grandparents because they'd be forever correcting him and trying to help. Yeah. But it just made him feel stupid. Yeah. And then he would cry all the time. So it was a very difficult period of time.
Sure, that makes sense. And we end up planting messages in our kids that we never intended to plant.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, and then trying to educate my parents lovingly that this is the process that we're doing. This is what the speech therapist and the occupational therapist said. You're not helping by speaking loud or speaking slow, or like that. They were like, honestly, that for him, and obviously for different children, it's different things, but they're like, if you hear him say something wrong, instead of bringing attention to it, say, oh yes, the grass is green. So you're saying the word again correctly, but you're not saying you said it wrong. You're not stopping the conversation, So it's just, and they just never really understood that. And I found that period of time really frustrating.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Now in language, because he has autism, how has the language development been? Because we just talked about speech sounds, that would be speech. And then we think about language as vocabulary, sentence building, social skills, all of the language component interaction. How did that develop?
So his comprehension, his ability to understand is actually leagues ahead of his age. So that's why he was very interesting. And as I said, he comprehended, he knew he wasn't getting it right. But his social, as in he's so brutally honest. He never sees that it's being rude or mean. Like if he's like, I don't want to play with you, he would just say that. Like, do you want to do this? No. like no thank you, like to bring in those little endearments and things. And the other thing too, he'd never think to reciprocate. So if you're like, what do you like, Casimir? And he tells you all about his fascination with Katy Perry. Weird, but he, loves Katy Perry, a singer. But he'd never be like, oh, so Dina Lynn, what do you like?
Right.
Like, so that kind of back and forward thing is something that, we're still working on to now because, yeah, and it's interesting because for me as a parent, when he has friends or when he goes to things, how much do I say to the other parent? Because I don't want to implant something in their head, but
Right.
he is not rude or mean or whatever deliberately, just doesn't seem to have a filter and says whatever comes into his head. And I actually find it lovingly refreshing, actually, but a lot
That
of
is,
people don't like it.
yeah. And I have friends that are adults with autism, and their brutal honesty is something I do appreciate. I don't always like it, but I do appreciate it because there are times that, like if you really want to know what somebody thinks about this thing, if you're questioning, I can ask an opinion and I will get an opinion. I always know that they're telling me the truth. If I give a meal and they don't like it, they're not choking it down, faking it. They're truthful. That is good. So are you getting any help now being able to teach reciprocity
Yeah,
or
so
the
he sees us
reciprocal? Good.
a psychologist now, and he works with that, and he he's a lot better, but you can see the efforting required, like,
Yes.
and I don't want him to mask, like to pretend and whatever. So it's a lot of work for him to he could see the wheels turning and you see him having to think because like very recently he had this friend at school who wasn't being particularly kind to him, and he
Mm-hmm.
can be taken advantage of because of how he is.
Mm-hmm.
And both the psychologist and I encouraged him not to be friends with them anymore, as in what we meant is make new friends, but what he heard was, oh yeah, and so something happened that for him was the last straw, and he's like, I just don't want to be friends with you anymore. And that didn't go down well, and the teacher called me and was all this sort of stuff. And I was like, he didn't mean it in a rude, mean, horrible way. He was just kind of like, yeah, I'm done now. And for him it was like, but that's what you guys have been telling me. And I was like, yeah, but you don't tell them that. So yeah, it's tough.
That is tricky. They don't really have that social filter. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're getting help with that. Now, occupational therapy is something that is common. Did you get occupational therapy?
Yep, he had that from 4 to 9. He finished that about 6 months ago.
That makes sense because of Play-Doh, and then you had the pencil. What else did he have to work on with occupational therapy?
Tying shoes, that
Okay.
took nearly 2 years.
Mhm.
Doing buttons,
Okay.
like things that for me I just never considered, and it's very hard. I imagine it's kind of like, think about driving a car.
Hmm.
Now that you get in there, you check your mirror, you do all the things that you should do, but you don't think about it. You're just singing away and you're driving and you're like, oh, here I am. But when you're first doing it, you're like seatbelt, mirrors, like every single step. And even things like doing up a button or tying a shoe, there are steps in these processes that when you do it effortlessly, you don't think to break it down. And also too, you might learn to tie the shoe or do the button, but then you get a new brand of shoe that is a little bit tougher or the texture's different, or a shirt that the buttonhole is looser or tighter. And it was like starting back from step one. So it was
Mm.
very challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you're saying, every parent of a child with autism can relate to easily. But it does sound like you have stepped into it and you're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm proud of you. Really. This is something that has not been an easy journey. So, what would you say if you were to think about parents that are in your place where they are looking at kiddos that are performing differently? The one that isn't performing quite as well, they've got that instinct. Something is off. What would you advise?
To keep asking professionals, not necessarily, like, as I said, friends or family might be well meaning.
Well, it sounds like your
To
doctor didn't know either. So,
Yes, but other like second opinion or third opinion, or for me the biggest thing, because we moved, that was great. People didn't have another experience of my other child. So and because sometimes I think that might have been a big barrier for us, because as I said, my daughter is gifted. People didn't really look at my son in the same way because they're like, well, we don't expect the same thing from him.
mhm,
So having somebody who had no experience of her
mhm,
to witness him. Like when she went to that childcare, before he went to the one she'd been to. So they were like, oh, she's very advanced. So I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder if he wasn't looked at in the same eyes because he was always being compared to her and she was so far ahead. So like if you have an inkling, get a second or a third or a fourth opinion and say, you know, what it is that concerns you, because it's funny, like autism is a spectrum and masking is real, and or even if it's not autism, but there's some areas like it's not a my son didn't have a global delay. And the other thing too that was interesting, to this day when I tell people he has autism, 9 out of 10 who don't know a whole lot about it will say no, he doesn't, he can make eye contact. And I was like, isn't that funny? It's like that's one thing on the spectrum. So it's kind of like he has, and for him the biggest area of delay was reading. And that was to the point, reading and letter recognition and stuff, where we were almost like, is he going to need to go to a school for higher needs children? But the school that we took him to persevered with him, and I've been so thankful. And now he reads every night. We're currently reading the Bad Guys series by Aaron Blabely. Well, he's reading it to me. And every night, once I tuck him in, I almost always have tears in my eyes because I'm like, this has been the biggest journey, and he's persevered with it. Yeah. And because in kindergarten, like we had kindergarten here in lockdown because it was COVID. And I remember the kindergarten teacher on our Zoom meeting, and I was just crying. And she's like, the biggest thing is that he's happy. This will come. Like, you don't need to stress about it. But he would not touch a book because things didn't come easy to him, and he's very sensitive. So he just wasn't interested in trying. So finding ways to encourage him. And as I said, he can make eye contact and he's actually quite outgoing. And one day, one of my clients said to him, because he was in the room with her permission, it was all good, don't panic about that. And she's like, Casimir, I'd love your autograph, because I'd written a book. And he was like, oh, and then properly incentivized, he was really interested in learning to write then because he wanted to sign books. So
that's great. That is fantastic that he stepped into that. I do have a question about the social piece.
Yes.
Are you scripting?
No.
Now, okay, so scripting, and some of my listeners will know this, is scripting is the practice of almost role-playing what you say in different situations so that you don't just say no, but you learn to say no, thank you, for a very simple example. So that was one thing. And then did you ever, on your own accord, seek out a speech pathologist when he was very little?
Not when he was very little. I don't know about the rules and stuff for it in different places, but for here, and I could be wrong, usually alternative health, you need a referral from your general practitioner. So that's why I was taking him to there, because of the way that our insurance and stuff works. If you do anything on your own, you get no rebates or anything from our Medicare. But if you get a referral, then you get some things. That's why I was trying to go through the official channel so it wasn't completely out of pocket.
Ah, sure. That makes sense. And it is that very situation why I have started this programming, because so many parents are in that place where they know something. They want to be able to help. They don't quite know how to help. There's nothing diagnosed. They don't know how to get it diagnosed. They don't quite know where to turn. They're stuck in that place for a time. And that's exactly the reason that I started this.
Yeah. And you don't know what you don't know. And that's the other thing I want to say to people.
Yeah.
If you don't know something, how are you going to know what to ask?
Exactly.
Like now, 5 years down the journey, if I was doing this again, if I'm not having any more children, but if I had another child, or if I was going through this again, it would be a totally different situation. But I've learned so much. I think sometimes we beat ourselves up because they're like, oh, I should have known. How would you have known?
Exactly.
If
I had known then what you know now is everybody's phrase, isn't it?
100%, yeah.
Yeah, that's true to everybody. And I can think of 15,000 things in my life. If I had known then what I know now, I would have made different choices too, or I'd have handled a situation differently. It sounds to me, though, like you did the best you could have done with the knowledge that you had at the time.
Yeah, and I think being open to, as I said, people's, especially people who spend a lot of time with them, like daycare or people outside of family, or also too, if you are following, like if you're coaching with Dina Lynn or you're working with a speech therapist, educating your family and extended family and friends about how the process that you're doing, so that you don't end up with their words. Like, as I said, if I had $1 for every person who said your son doesn't have autism, he can make eye contact, now I just kind of laugh. But in the beginning I found it so frustrating. But the process that you're working, stick to that and work that system, And then when other people come in with their suggestions, like you can say, thank you so much. I appreciate your input. This is what we're working on. Like, so you don't end up trying too many different things because then nothing works.
That is a very, very good thing to bring up. And you are absolutely right. I know that as a speech therapist, when I work with families, I can pick to work on this or this or this. Like I can pick which thing to begin with. And I have my reasons to pick certain places to begin. But that doesn't mean that it is right. It is one of maybe there's 3 or 4 very good places to start.
And
And
I
I
love
think,
that too, that you're saying, because the other thing too, with our psychotherapist, we actually end up changing a couple of times to find one that was a really good fit. But the first one we saw, what she wanted to work on wasn't what I wanted to work on. And I was trying to say to her, look, I see that this is going to need to be addressed at some stage. This is the thing that's most pressing for me.
mm,
And we could not come to an understanding on that. So I ended up finding somebody else because
good.
there's so many things to work on. And yeah, it's like, is this a priority for me right now with the capacity I have, with the availability I have? This is the thing that's most pressing. And
Yes.
obviously for your child too, like, coming on the same page there. So like for Casimir, things like buttons and things, they were quite late. We did them when he was like 8 because we had other things that were more important or would lead on to it. So yes, there is the taking in of the professional's suggestion, but like for me, I'll give the example. He slept in my bed and the psychologist was like, no, he needs to be in his own room and you need to go back in every night and whatever. And I was like, I am exhausted. I don't expect him to be sleeping in my bed at 16. It's like, I know this will get addressed, but what I want addressed is the fact that he can't be in a room by himself. Because literally he was so much separation anxiety that he, would follow you from room to room. This is what I want to work on. We'll
Yeah.
get to that later.
Yeah. And as a parent, I'm so glad that you stood up for yourself and advocated for yourself in that, because I think you're also advocating for your child in that, right?
Yeah, and now
Because,
not only can he be in a room by himself, he can be on a floor by himself. Like we've got a 2-story house, and yeah, like he wouldn't be on one level if nobody else was there. Even if it was on a second level, had all the worries and talking to him, not dismissing them and downplaying them, but working through that rather than like going and taking him back to his bed 15 times a night.
right, right. And I'm glad you bring that up too, because if somebody is working with a professional that isn't working with you in the way your home operates, the way you are capable to follow through as a parent. I mean, if you're exhausted, you need sleep. That's taking care of yourself and putting your life mask on, right? And you need to take care of making sure that you sleep and he sleeps. And if in the same bed is working, everything else can work better if you guys are rested, right?
100%. And one last thing to that point, if you are working with multiple professionals,
Mm-hmm.
one thing I noticed, and I just noticed it, he was holding his pencil differently, and he had a positioner, like it's a grip that you put on there if anyone listening. And I asked him about it, and he's like, "Oh, my speech therapist told me to do it this way, and my occupational therapist told me to do it that way, and my teacher tells me to do it this way." And they're actually
Shoot.
inadvertently conditioning him to be a people pleaser. And
Yeah.
that's when I had to say, like, and then you can get the multidisciplinary approach, like an email or a communication and permission. And like, if multiple people are addressing the same thing, to make sure that they are doing it in the same way so that you're not confusing the poor kid.
Right. He doesn't need to learn 3 things at that point. He needs to learn one. So he has more brain space to learn the other things too. But I'm
Yeah,
really
so what we
glad.
ended up doing was the speech therapist left that to the occupational therapist, and then the school had a conversation with the occupational therapist and followed their lead. So it's kind of like, when multiple people identify something that is in their wheelhouse, which path are we going to address it on?
I'm glad you had the fortitude. And if any listener that is working with a professional that isn't working with you, it is time to do just what you did, Susan. And you found somebody who is willing to work with you, because
Yeah.
what you practice in the home matters a lot.
Yeah, and otherwise they're just learning to do it at school or they're learning to do it at this place. And even now it's funny, he's going for his pen license. I don't know if you guys do that in the States, but here they get to a grade and they get their pen license and the teacher's not happy with his positioning. So I had to send them a message and say, I appreciate that this is the standard thing, but he's been working with an occupational therapist for 5 years and this is the way that he holds the pencil. Like, this is not up for a discussion.
Good for you. Your son is lucky to have a mama that is such a good advocate.
Thank you.
Now, before I let you go, what would be the final message that you would leave with parents if they were to take away one thing from this episode? What is the most important thing?
That you're always doing your best. Because I think sometimes, as we've both discussed in this episode, when you know more, then you start beating yourself up, or if only I'd done this, or if only I'd done that. Like, you're always doing your best. Your best can get better, or your best can change or mature as you do. But instead of second guessing, why did I do this or why did I do that? Because at the time, that was the best information you had available. So there's no point beating up past you, or at that time you were exhausted or you were depleted.
Yeah.
Or like, there are times where I'm not the kindest mum to my kids, and then, you know, I will apologize. I'm never above apologizing to my kids. I know some people don't, but, you know, and then later I'll still be racking it with the mum guilt, and they've honestly forgotten. So I think sometimes, you know, you are doing your best and your best gets better, and to stay future focused rather than like second guessing. Because yeah, sometimes you'll learn a new skill or a new approach and be like, oh, if I'd known this years ago, but you didn't. So it's just kind of letting that go.
Be gracious with yourself.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Very good. Excellent. Thank you for this interview, and thank you for your time. I appreciate it, Suzanne.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Hey parents, I hope you found this episode helpful. If so, would you please take 30 seconds and share it with a friend who also lives or works with children? I would really appreciate it if you would leave a quick review for the show on Apple Podcasts. I read every review, and it lights me up to know that this show is making a difference. Then come join my Facebook community, where you'll meet other parents who are dedicated to helping their children grow too. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thank you for joining me. Now it's time to go. Let's pop our kiddos in the strollers and go look around outdoors and see what we have to talk about.